Good evening. My name is Kate Stoney. I'm from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. And at the NHLBI, I oversee a portfolio of clinical trials and of a number of implementation science kinds of trials. And so I'm really happy to be here tonight to talk to you about dissemination and implementation research. Before we get on to what D&I, and that's, when I say D&I, what I mean is dissemination and implementation. It's just so much easier to say D&I. So that's what I mean when I refer to D&I research. So before we start talking about D&I research, I thought I would give you a little bit of a story to tell you, because later on, when you're going to want to know, give me an example of what D&I research is, we're going to come back to this story. So I want to just give you a little bit of footing so that you understand what we're talking about later on. And the story is one that you may be familiar with from a whole variety of sources, and it has to do with the rate of smoking cigarettes in this country. It's a really interesting story because, of course, cigarette smoking has been around in our country for a long time, in our culture for a long time. And since about the 1950s, the rates of smoking have changed dramatically. The peak smoking rates in our country were around late 1950s, early 1960s. And part of the reason there was that peak was because smoking rates during World War II really increased. And then in 1964, the first Surgeon General report on cigarette smoking came out. And that's about where this graph starts. Right here is 1965 data. And these are data that show smoking rates by a couple of different groups. This group in the purple line is male smokers. These are the percentage of male smokers in our country. And what we're showing on the x-axis is dates. So this is time, all right? So what you can see in male smokers is a very precipitous and dramatic drop in smoking rates from, in this case, 1964, although it dropped starting about 1960. But this is where the precipitous drop started, down to the mid-2000s, 2005. And what you can see here is at a rate of about 20 to 23%, all right? So that is a success story for those who think that we should not be smoking very much in this country because it's a significant health hazard. And if you look here, this line has to do with the rate of smokers among women who are pregnant. Now, that hasn't been tracked as long as the other lines have, but since the time of tracking, what you can see is also a very rapid, precipitous, dramatic decline in smoking rates among women who are pregnant. So this male smoker story and this pregnant women story are success stories. But there are two other lines on this graph which are really interesting and tell an even more complex story. And the first one is this orange line. And this line represents the rate of women smokers. So you can see that although men in the 1960s smoked more than half of men in this country smoked in 1964, and about a third of women smoked. And although the percentage of women smokers has declined in the 50 years since that time, the decline has not been as dramatic or as precipitous, and it's kind of leveled off here. Okay. We're going to explore some of those reasons in a minute. The other line here in the darker orange line refers to the rate of smoking among high school students, and this has had a lot of people worried in about the late 1990s, early 2000s, because you can see that, and again, this is one of those lines that has only recently been tracked, but what you can see is that there was actually an increase in the early 2000s. That increase has leveled off, but the rates are still higher than you might expect. These are people that have been alive during the time that the health damaging effects of smoking were absolutely clear. Okay, so these are interesting data. So what does it have to do with us? Well, I want to talk a little bit about these two orange lines and why they might be the way they are. There are a lot of reasons, but here's one. This is an advertisement that was extraordinarily successful, and it was advertising using a character that came to be known as Joe Cool. This advertising character was obviously advertising for Camel cigarettes. It was specifically who do you think this was targeting? It was targeting men, and it was specifically targeting teenage men, right? Fast cars, very cool, the cool shades. This was an ad that was extraordinarily successful in increasing the rates of smoking among kids. And it was meant to do that. It was targeting that age range and that gender. Another example, and there are tons of these examples that you can look at, but another really striking example was the advertising that was targeting women, and specifically targeting women who smoke or they wanted to get to smoke. This is the Virginia Slims advertising campaign. And Virginia Slims, again, a highly successful advertising campaign. These cigarettes were manufactured, designed, and advertised specifically towards women. Virginia is a woman's name. Slims is a descriptor that a lot of women find to be a positive descriptor. And the ads very frequently included wording such as this: we made Virginia Slims especially for women because women are dainty and beautiful and sweet and generally different from men. So it's pretty blatant. It's not hard to see that this was specifically targeting women. The tagline on the Virginia Slims advertising was, "You've come a long way, baby." So they kind of juxtaposed the sweet, dainty, and beautiful image of women to the powerful, empowering image of women. So they kind of got all groups of women that they were targeting. And then they always had some very sophisticated-looking women in their advertising campaigns. These campaigns worked. They worked really well. So that describes part of the uptake in smoking or the lack of decrease in smoking that we saw in the previous graph among women and among kids. What we're going to talk about in implementation science has to do with the other side of the coin. That is, how can we improve the delivery of care, of interventions targeting smoking cessation. And we'll talk about that, but I wanted you to get the sort of the broad picture of what this kind of work is up against. And when we talk about tobacco cessation, and again, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but when we talk about tobacco cessation efforts, they're complex. There are lots of targets that tobacco cessation efforts can be directed towards. So there are certainly patient-level targets, and that has to do with advertising, with public health announcements, with school-based interventions. Those are patient-level, but there are also practitioner-level treatments, how we help practitioners to implement tobacco cessation treatments. There's social education that happens on a community level. These are PSAs and other kinds of educational efforts. Environmental structures are often targeted towards, can be structured in order to deliver messages. How many times have you seen in public places an ashtray that's actually usable? They don't really exist anymore, right? And that's part of the environmental structure that either can encourage or discourage this particular behavior. And then, of course, there are a whole host of statutory regulations and legal kinds of regulations that have had a tremendous impact in the case of tobacco cessation. on the behaviors of people and behaviors at all of these levels, at the patient level, the provider level, and the environmental level. Okay, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. I want to give you a little bit of background on sort of the state of our healthcare system today, because that really frames the need for doing more implementation and dissemination research in this country and across many other countries. I want to talk about what I think of as the translational spectrum. When you are planning studies, when you're reading studies, when you're conducting studies, understanding where your study falls across the entire translational spectrum is really key in terms of understanding what are the most appropriate next steps for carrying out the next stage of research. We're going to talk about how we define dissemination and implementation research and give you some examples. And we're going to piggyback onto the tobacco cessation example and give you an example of what a D&I study looks like in the context of tobacco cessation. It's really important for you to understand some of the design issues that are specific issues for D&I research, including analytic methods, as well as design methods. And then I want to talk about some opportunities for those of you who may be interested in conducting dissemination and implementation research or learning more about dissemination and implementation research. So that's the overall picture of what we're going to cover today. It's kind of a broad sweep of what D&I research looks like. So healthcare in this country. You know, many people talk about our underperforming healthcare system. And, we can think about underperformance in a number of ways. We can think about it in terms of cost. We can think about it in terms of health outcomes. We can think about it in terms of efficiencies. But in many respects, we have enormous resources available to us within the healthcare system in this country that may not be used optimally to influence any of those parameters, whether we're talking about cost, efficiency, or health outcomes. And part of the reason has to do with the fact that we're so siloed in our healthcare system. Now, that is improving in many ways as we have more integrated healthcare systems and tools to make those systems integrated, like EMRs or EHRs are more readily available. That integration is becoming more feasible. But even then, our electronic health record systems aren't really integrated across systems. If you get your health care at a VA or a large HMO, there's good integration of the EHRs. But if you go to if your PCP is a community health doc and your cardiologist is another community health doc, unless they're under an umbrella system, those EHRs don't share information, or it's very, very cumbersome to get them to share information. So we still have, in many cases, a fairly siloed approach to delivering healthcare. And that lack of integration of healthcare means that our healthcare may be delivered in more costly because there is oftentimes duplication, there is lack of efficiency in the system. This increase in, or this high level of expense in our healthcare system means that healthcare is increasingly inaccessible to people, because as the costs increase, the ability of people to get their healthcare has diminished. Now, the ACA has attempted to thwart some of this difficulty and really help make healthcare more affordable and accessible to people, but we have a long way to go still. In addition to being inaccessible because of cost, we also have an accessibility issue because of geography. We have a large portion of our population that simply doesn't have physical access to appropriate health care. And the best example I know about that has to do with psychiatric care. We have a large portion of the population in the Midwest who simply do not have access to psychiatric care because there just isn't any care available to them in their geographic region. So that kind of inaccessibility is also an issue, and it's led to significant health disparities as well. And another issue in our healthcare, and this is really the crux of the issue for dissemination and implementation research, has to do with the degree to which evidence-based care is delivered. To what extent is the care that's guideline-based, for example, to what extent is that care delivered? And we know that in general, guideline-based care is delivered in some populations less than 50% of the time. That means that every time you get some kind of clinical care, about half of that is not guideline-based. And that contributes to our difficulties in our healthcare system today. And let me give you a little bit I like data, and I think it's helpful for you to have something to hang your hat on when you see data in sort of black and white, or in this case, in a number of colors. This has to do with the financial situation in terms of healthcare. And what you see here is 6 countries. These are all developed countries that we share many characteristics with. And the United States is in this sort of mustard color, and what you can see on the x-axis is time. And on the y-axis is the total expenditures on health, and it is as a percentage of our gross domestic product. That's a good way to look at how much we spend on health. What you can see is in 1970, there were some differences across these 6 countries, but they weren't huge differences. But as time has gone on, a couple of things have happened. The amount of health care costs as a function of GDP for all of these countries has risen. Okay, so it's a phenomenon that has happened across the board. And part of the reason those costs have risen is because our technology and our diagnostic procedures have become both more technologically advanced, but also more expensive. But the other thing that you can see is that the rise in costs in the United States of America far outpaces that of these other countries. And it isn't specific to these other countries like Canada, Germany, Switzerland, United Kingdom, and Austria. It is across all industrialized countries in the world. We outpace, in terms of cost, we outpace every industrialized country in the world. And here's another way of looking just at data from our country. This again is year, and it's a little bit more current to 2015. And what you can see is the national health expenditures, again, as a share of GDP, we're about 18% right now. So we're not quite hit. It was projected a little while ago to hit 20%. It hasn't quite gotten that high, but about 18% of our GDP is spent on healthcare. That's a really hefty percentage of GDP. If you look at health outcomes in relationship to total cost, there is no relationship. So what that suggests is that we're not as efficient as we could be. And part of that efficiency, I would submit to you, has to do with this issue of whether we're delivering evidence-based care to patients when they're seen. So what do we want, ideally, in any healthcare system? We want a healthcare system that's more integrated, that it can improve care at a more efficient rate, that's cost-effective, and that, of course, is personalized. Now, this personalization is something that I think has really caught the attention nationwide of not only healthcare providers, but nationwide. So I anticipate that that's a direction that we're going to move in fairly rigorously over time. But specific to D&I research, what we really want is to be able to translate the findings that we have from research into clinical care. And we want that to happen quickly. quickly. Now, here at NIH, what we're interested in is research, right? But we want that research to be utilized as efficiently and quickly in clinical care. And that is the area of research that's covered by dissemination and implementation research. So, to really hit this point, what I'm really saying is that many times we know what to do with ideal patients. Our research tells us what to do with ideal patients because, of course, much of the research that we do, phase 2 trials and even early phase 3 trials, really have highly characterized patient populations that we might think of as ideal patients, right? These are the patients that we want to enroll in our trials because we want to have a clear, definitive answer to the question, does this intervention work for this kind of patient? But that's the ideal patient, right? That's not the patient that comes into a clinic every day. So we need to know how to translate those findings for the ideal patient in the ideal setting to real life patients in real life settings. So just to give you a little bit of an example of this, many of our trials in taking sort of ideal patients don't accept patients with high comorbidities, right? It gives us a messy picture, and we don't quite understand how effective our interventions are in patients that are highly comorbid. And yet, in clinical practice, most of our patients are highly comorbid. So we need to understand how to take what we know from these ideal patients and apply them to more complex patients. And this later stage of research, it's not research that happens early, it's later stage research. This is known as translational research, is known as implementation science, is known as dissemination research. That's the place that we're trying to capture in this type of research metric. Now, the picture that we have of this translational research is not a pretty picture. And these data are cited very frequently. There's a very nice analysis done many years ago now, but it still holds. And the analysis is this. So this study looked at a number of studies and asked the question, how long does it take for research, once it's published, how long does it take for that research to get translated into routine clinical practice? And the answer is, well, number one, it takes 17 years. And number two, the amount of research that gets translated into routine clinical practice is only 14%. Right? That means that the majority of research that we're doing never gets applied to clinical research. Now, some of it won't, but it's likely that more than 14% of it should. And the other way of looking at this is looking at sort of what that pipeline is, like where are the problems in this pipeline? And if you kind of sketch it out in your mind, you can, as researchers, where the difficulties are. We start here and we look at, where are the funding priorities. This is where NIH has a voice trying to determine what those funding priorities are. And then there's grants that come in, they get reviewed, and then they get carried out, and then there's publications, and that has a whole peer review system. And then once a lot of publications in a specific field are out there, they somehow get synthesized, and then professional societies and sometimes the NIH take a look at that bundle of research and synthesize it and make some determinations about what the guidelines should be. Right? And that takes us to here. And all of these things are impacted by academic life, by promotions and tenure, by a whole host of funding decisions that get made. And then finally, guidelines are published. The place where we're talking about, when we talk about how implementation science can narrow that time frame, that 17-year odyssey. The place that we're talking about is right here. From the time that guidelines are published to the time those guidelines are routinely put into practice, this is that time frame that we would like to squish down to much more rapid uptake. And that's where implementation science is doing research in order to figure out how to narrow that gap. Other people are going to be working on narrowing these gaps. And some of that is going to be the research community, some of that is going to be the funders, some of that is going to be the journals, but this is where implementation scientists live. This is where they're trying to decrease that time frame. So the goal of dissemination implementation research is to take what we know works in ideal patients, in ideal settings, and figure out, and that are effective, and figure out how to apply them into less well-controlled and less well-characterized patient populations in real-world settings. How do we do that? How do we do it without having a whole research endeavor in place? How do we do it without having a research team in place? How do we help our PCPs, our other specialists? How do we help them understand how they can take these guidelines that are published from these really well-controlled trials and apply them in their own settings? That's what the goal of dissemination and implementation research is. And very often, what we're trying to do is either provide insight into what practitioners need to do, what their governance structures need to do, how they need to interact with patients and payers, and how their systems need to operate in order to apply what we know to the patient populations that are being seen. This is translating evidence into practice. Make sense? Yeah. This is my sort of breather. Latest research shows that we really should do something with all this research. And the doing something with all this research, in this case, is implementation science. So I like to think about the translational continuum or the translational spectrum. I referred to it before. We often think about bench to bedside, right? We all talk about that as being sort of how do we get from a laboratory setting to the bedside. But in this case, and in practice, that bedside is oftentimes an academic medical center or an NIH clinical center, right? These, again, are they're very highly controlled settings, very well-characterized patients. And the translational continuum actually goes beyond that bedside. In fact, that bedside is just the first step. We need to figure out how we get from bench to bedside to clinic to broad communities to populations, right? So when we think about clinics, we're thinking about beyond academic medical centers, and we're talking about PCP offices, community-based clinics. We could be talking about CVS minute clinics, right? We talk about communities. We're talking about going out into the community where healthcare often is delivered, work sites, school sites, WISE, other places, community organizations where healthcare or healthcare advice is often delivered. And on a population basis, we get healthcare messages all the time, right? You watch TV, you read the newspaper, there are healthcare messages all the time. So how do we most effectively deliver those messages in order to have the best clinical outcomes? Those are the domains that the implementation science is really reaching for. Now, I like this schematic because it really speaks the language, I think, that we as researchers all speak. It kind of gives it's the same thing that I just showed you, but it gives a little bit of more language that we're used to. So when we talk about bench research, we're talking about basic science research, right? That's lab-based research. These are preclinical studies, animal studies, safety, tolerance studies. And when we translate those into humans, then we're talking about sort of the bedside arena. So this is the first stage human clinical research. These are patient populations, generally patients with all the same condition. And we can do observational studies, we can do clinical trials, we can do phase 2 trials, some early phase 3 trials. This movement from bench to this bedside, this sort of movement from bench science to phase 2 efficacy trials, this is called T1. Now, we have a tradition of calling it phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. You're familiar with that terminology. There's a new terminology that kind of maps onto that called T1 or translation 1, T2, translation 2, T3, T4. There are lots of Ts. And you can think of them, they're not exactly mapped to each other exactly, but they are similar. And in the dissemination and implementation field, people tend to talk the T1, T2, T3 talk rather than the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 talk. Okay? It's a little confusing. So T1 refers to translation to humans. We then take the science one step further. We want to translate from bedside to practice. And that refers to T3 and T4. T2 and T3. T2 is really practice-based research where we're really doing phase 2, late phase 2, early phase 3, and phase 4 studies. Here is where we're doing studies of pretty well-controlled populations, right? And what we're trying to do in these areas is trying to figure out how we can translate our findings from well-controlled bedside type of research to patients. How do we translate to patients? And then in a later stage, how do we translate into practices? So this is working with systems, working with practitioners. How do we get these data, these interventions translated into their hands? And then there's later stage translational research to communities. Because there's not a lot of research in this arena, there's not a lot of research in this arena because it builds on each other. Okay, so finally, we get to talk about what are we talking about with the implementation research? What is the definition of implementation research? Well, this is a definition. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it gives you a sense of what we mean by implementation research. And this book definition is implementation is the use of strategies in order to help us adopt and integrate what we know works, evidence-based, guideline-based interventions, so that we can improve care in real-world settings. So sometimes those adaptations are actually at the level of the intervention, and sometimes they're at the level of the practitioner. And the idea here is that we can't just tell practitioners, you need to do exactly what was done in earlier stage efficacy research in your clinical practice, because they don't have the resources and their patients don't look like those patients. So we need to figure out how to help practitioners understand how to adapt the intervention for the use of these complex patients. And implementation science tests these adaptations, tests these strategies. Okay? Just a really quick example. Let's say you have an intervention to for obesity. Let's say you have an obesity intervention, right? And patients come in and you have weekly groups and people have a weigh-in and they talk about problems that they have, and they meet with a nutritionist and they meet with a physical activity person, and maybe they have their blood pressure taken by a nurse, and they do that for 12 weeks, and this is found to be an efficacious intervention for obesity, right? Clinical practices can't do this. The intervention is too complex, requires too many areas of expertise for clinical practitioners to do this. So what does implementation science try to do? What we try to do in implementation science is take the essence of the interventions and adapt it so that it can be utilized. Excuse me. So for example, one way you could adapt it is to put some of those modules online. That's cost effective, and it may work. And in an implementation study, that adaptation would be made and then it would be tested to see if it works. So that's just gives you an idea of what we're talking about when we talk about adaptations. Dissemination research is a little bit different, and frankly, we don't do a lot of it. But dissemination is the distribution of interventions and other documentation information to clinical practice audiences. So you might think of dissemination as being what happens when people go to conferences, when you go to American Heart Association or whatever your favorite conference is. That is, in essence, part of dissemination. But that's not dissemination research. Dissemination research tests what the most effective strategies are in order to disseminate that research. Most of what we talk about in the science area has to do with implementation science. Okay. So as you're reading the literature and as you're talking to people about this area, you may hear people use other terms. And these other terms mean essentially what we're talking about. So diffusion of innovation, knowledge to action, knowledge transfer. Some of these terms are used in different countries. Knowledge translation is commonly used in Canada, for example. Research to practice, research utilization, scale up. We use that term a lot here. When you talk to implementation scientists, they talk about scale up. And what they're talking about is, how do we get this from a very specific group of patients in a very specific setting and scale it up to a broader setting, okay? And translational research, which is a term I use very frequently. These all are referring to essentially the same thing that I'm talking about in implementation science. So, what are the questions that D&I research might address? What are the kinds of things that you might be trying to do in D&I research? And obviously the sort of overarching question is, how do we get evidence-based interventions into real-world settings? That's the basic idea of what D&I research wants to do. In order to do that, how do we modify interventions so that they're not only effective in terms of their clinical output, but they're acceptable, they're cost-effective, which is part of being acceptable, and they can be implemented, they're feasible among individuals who are actually going to be using them and who may vary in terms of what their area of expertise is or about what their training is, right? So those are implementation questions. How do we get practitioners, patients, settings, systems, how do we get those folks to actually implement guidelines? What are the feasibility issues? How do we get adherence levels to be higher? How do we get uptake of what we know works? And then how do we reach the largest numbers of people, especially those who very much need enhanced clinical care? How do we get to those people? We know our healthcare system isn't reaching a large portion of people that need care. So how do we get to those people? So these are all implementation questions. They're all highly relevant and exciting, I think. So one of the things that I think is important to understand in implementation research is that what we're doing, and this goes into some of the design questions that we're going to talk about, what we're really doing is doing studies that can strike a balance between rigor and relevance in our methodology, in our statistical analysis, and in our outcomes. So it is the case that patient populations are going to be more complex than they often are in our phase 2, phase 3 trials. And that adds some complexity and messiness, but it makes our findings more relevant, right, when we do it in real-world settings. So I want to talk a little bit about this balance between rigor and relevance, because I think it's really important, if you're designing a study, to understand what you're getting by altering this balance and what you're giving up by altering the balance, okay? So here's the way I like to think about it. When we talk about relevance, what we're really talking about is generalizability. And when we talk about rigor, what we're really talking about is quality control. So let's start on the right side of this seesaw. And what you can see here is studies that have maximum control. They have designed the study to have the most control that they possibly can. And you already know this because you've learned this already, we refer to these studies as having high levels of internal validity. The researcher is imposing maximum control. So how do you do that? Well, you have very well characterized patient populations that don't vary a lot from each other. They don't differ a lot. You don't let in people that have complex disorders or comorbidities. You really want to get it right. So you want to have a very similar cohort of patients that you enroll into your trial. And you want the settings to be really similar too. You don't want a lot of extraneous variance into your trial. So these are the ways that you actually impose lots of experimental control. And when you do this, you have high levels of internal validity, and you have a very rigorous study. But you don't have a very relevant study, right? Because when you give up some of that internal validity, when you give up some of that control, what you're getting is more external validity or more generalizability to a broader patient population. Now, this is a balance. This is a seesaw. When you give up internal validity to get external validity, and the opposite works as well. So what do you get when you have high levels of external validity? Well, you get more ability to generalize across patient populations, across settings, across ages, across situations. And that's good for implementation science, right? That's what we want. We want interventions that are more generalizable. So we want a lot of external validity. We want a lot of relevance. But what we're giving up is this control. Now, we don't give all of it up. We don't even give most of it up, but we give some of it up in order to increase our generalizability. So we take more variable patient populations, and we live with more messiness in terms of who delivers the intervention and how frequently they deliver. We might not even tell practitioners how to deliver the intervention. We just give it to them and see what they do. We give up that control in order to get more generalizability, because that's what life looks like in the real world. So why is it so bad to give up that control? Well, what I would submit to you is that when you're very early on in a research question that you're looking at, let's say you've developed an intervention and you want to test it, you don't want to have high generalizability, because what you really want is maximal rigor. What you want to know is there a signal that tells you that my trial, my intervention, is beneficial. So you want the highest levels of control that you can get, and you design your study in that way. So you have very, very high levels of internal validity. But as you progress and as you develop an intervention more fully and have more evidence for efficacy and then effectiveness, then you want to give up some of that internal control for the ability to generalize more broadly. And you want to live with higher levels of external validity so that you can apply what you know in very well-characterized populations to broader populations. Make sense? Okay. What do you really give up? What you really give up in either of these cases is error. And have you talked about type 1 and type 2 error in this course? Yeah, so you know. So high levels of internal validity, it's great. The problem that you have is that you might miss something. You might miss an effect that's really there. High levels of external validity, very good for later stage research, but the error that you live with is that you might see something that's not really there. You have a false positive. So that's the how you figure out where you want your error to be for the question that you're asking. So, you know, I really think it's important for you, and really the only thing I want you to take away from this slide is that dissemination and implementation research is highly contextual. And that's really what I've been saying all along, that there are contextual factors relevant to the patient population, there are contextual factors relevant to the intervention, the setting, the provider or the researcher provider. These are all highly contextualized. And because of that, you have a lot of generalizability and external validity, but it's important to understand that that is what you're looking at. You're looking at highly contextualized factors. So the other thing to really understand about sort of design questions with regard to D&I research is your outcomes. And interestingly, in D&I research, the outcomes that are of the highest interest have to do with what we often refer to as process measures. So these are things like, do providers accept the intervention as you're delivering it, or as you're asking them to deliver it? Are providers able to adhere to it? Do you have an intervention that requires 45 minutes of provider time? If you do, the providers aren't going to be able to adhere to it. So is there acceptance, is there adherence by the healthcare provider? Do your patients accept the intervention? You know, when you enroll participants into a study, there's a tacit agreement for acceptance. Right? That's what they sign the consent form. But patients at a clinic level have to also agree, have to accept the intervention. So that's an important. Does the patient group accept, and are they able to adhere to it, to the intervention? Is general practice able to take up the intervention? Is there good diffusion? So can your intervention, when you put it into a particular setting, does it get diffused more broadly? If it does, that implies that there's greater levels of implementation uptake. Cost and cost effectiveness are also really important when it's relevant, but really important dissemination and implementation outcomes, because that has implications for acceptance. All of these things are also, so all of these are typically, one or more of these are typically primary outcomes, but effectiveness of the intervention is also an important outcome. And that's especially the case if you've adapted the intervention substantially. if you've gone from a face-to-face intervention to a web-based intervention, that's a substantial adaptation. And you want to test whether that adaptation is not only acceptable, but also if it works for the outcome, for the clinical outcome that you're looking for. And it's always important in any research that you do to look for unintended consequences and to evaluate the impact. So there are a lot of sort of standard implementation strategies and approaches that have been used for a whole variety of interventions. So, for example, one really well-used implementation effort is chart reminders, right? So a provider goes in to see a patient, opens up the laptop, opens up the EHR, and types in the provider name, and there's an alert. This patient has hypertension. Have you checked the blood pressure? That kind of alert is actually an implementation strategy, right? And what the alert is doing is pinging the provider to carry out guideline-based care. So those kinds of alerts, much more sophisticated than I just described, is an implementation strategy. Now, how well it works in terms of providers adhering to the ping and how well it works in terms of clinic outcomes in the patient, those are implementation questions that are being asked. But that is an implementation strategy. Clinical guideline is an implementation strategy. But again, how well it works, we already know the guidelines, just putting out guidelines. The Heart Association puts out a guideline for how you should treat hypertension. That guideline takes a very long time to get taken up by providers. We already know that those guidelines, they're important, they're necessary, but they are not sufficient in implementing the recommendations. I've talked about intranet-based interventions. Some of the more interesting implementation efforts now have to do with partnerships within the community. Sometimes provider pharmacist partnerships or other community health worker partnerships can be very effective, very cost-effective as well. So I promised you an example, a real-life example in terms of smoking. I love this cartoon. I never get to use it, so I always put it in if it's even modestly relevant. So here we go. We talked about smoking rates. We talked about the fact that they're in decline, but not for everyone. I mean, they're in decline for everyone, but not as robust a decline as we would like. So why is that a case? Everyone knows that smoking is bad for you, right? Ask any kid on the street, is smoking good for your health? And they will tell you, smoking is not good for you. So why do people smoke? Well, why do people smoke in the face of a wide range of effective smoking cessation strategies? Well, if you look at this question, one of the best ways you can get to how to answer that question is to take a population for whom smoking rates are exceedingly high and smoking cessation uptake is exceedingly low. And that's the population that I want to talk to you about today. These are military recruits. Smoking rates in the military is very high, and one of the most striking statistics that I can give you is that although military recruits who enter the military, so these are first-time recruits that come into the military, their smoking rates are higher than average. The national average for smoking right now is 18% across all, but the average for young military recruits is much higher than that. But the scary thing is that by the time these recruits exit from the military, the rates of smoking are higher. They're higher than when they went in. Okay, so why are these military recruits not getting effective smoking cessation treatments? So that was a question that was asked by an implementation study. Oh, this is a little background I should tell you first. This is a C ration, and this is what members of the military are given when they're in active combat. And this is from 1975, and you can see they have, a dinner, and they have, snacks and chocolates and matches and cigarettes. That was included in every C ration in 1975. Amazing, huh? That is not included anymore, but smoking rates are still high. Another really interesting phenomenon, smoking in submarines is banned, but it wasn't banned until 2010. Until then, smoking in submarines, this is a very enclosed space, was acceptable and not banned. So 30% of members of the military smoke, and if you're in active combat, it's higher than that. Okay, so smoking in the military is a problem, and part of it has to do with historical tradition, and part of it has to do with the lack of effective smoking cessation strategies that are implemented in recruits. So the DoD has gotten wind of this problem. They recognize it as a priority. And what we know, if you're in the smoking cessation area, what you know is that we really do have pretty good interventions. Quit lines, which are simply telephone lines that you can call. They're free. You can call them anytime, day or night, and talk to somebody. If you're trying to quit and you're having a problem quitting, or you're teetering on the edge, you're trying to decide, should I pick up that cigarette or not? I've had a really rough day. I don't have anyone to talk to. You can call one of these lines, pick up the phone, talk to somebody, and they will talk you down, or try to. They're very effective. They provide social support, they provide information, and they're very effective. Nicotine replacement. We know nicotine replacement became available widely in early 1990, and it's very effective smoking cessation strategy. And you can get nicotine replacement in many different forms, as you all know. So the implementation study that I want to tell you about ask the question, can we use these two effective strategies? And there are others, but can we use just these two effective strategies to decrease smoking rates in U.S. military recruits? Simple question. So we already have the intervention. This is not designing a new intervention. This is implementing an intervention in military recruits. So what are the problems? Well, part of the problem is that it's hard to do studies in military recruits, first of all. There's a chain of command. Part of the reason it's hard to do it, even if you get permission, is that it's hard to get recruits to sign up. But once you get the approvals of the chain of command, and once you work within the structure, then you can do the study. And this study was actually, this is a suite of studies that were done in these military recruits. So choosing intervention is important, and in this suite of studies that I'm going to talk about, what the researchers decided to do was to do two easily implementable interventions that we know are effective. That's quit lines and nicotine replacement therapy. And the question that was asked is, what if we just self-pace these two interventions? What if we just tell military recruits, if you want to quit smoking, and we think you should, if you want to quit smoking, here are two strategies to do it, and here is how you can do it, and we will pay for it. And, have at it if you want, but if you don't want, that's fine. Or can we do it in a more structured way? And is that self-pacing effective or as effective as the more structured way? And can we do this pretty cheap? Now, the beauty of working with military recruits when you're doing a smoking cessation study is that when you enter boot camp, you have 8 weeks of mandatory cessation. You don't get a say in it. So these recruits don't smoke for 8 weeks. And then after that, they really have a choice about whether they're going to go back to smoking if they were smokers when they entered the military, or whether they're going to stay quit. Right? So this suite of studies took advantage of that 8-week cessation to look at that, look at what worked. And this first study that I'm going to tell you about is of 1,400 recruits, primarily from the Air Force, primarily men, although a high proportion of women, about 40%, a little over 40% of women, an average of 39 years, and they smoked just under a pack of cigarettes a day, 17 to 18 cigarettes a day. And all of them had tried to quit, at least once, typically a couple of times. And the two arms that they were randomized to was they had a counselor that would help them quit, face-to-face, right? That's more like what we do in sort of standard effectiveness trials. Or they had this self-pace. They were given the same resources, they were given the same intervention, they were given the same information. But they had, in one case, they had someone working with them, in the other case, they did it by themselves. And here are the abstinence rates. At the end of the counselor-led intervention, half stayed quit, and that's a big number. That's a really big number for smoking cessation. But a quarter that were self-paced were quit. So that's a pretty good number. If they looked at the 12-month follow-up, the gap narrowed. So a little more of the counselor-initiated people stayed quit, but a very small number of those who were self-paced and quit initially went back to smoking. So that gives us a lot of information. It has nothing to do with the intervention, right? It has to do with how we implement the intervention. Do we need to have counselors delivering the intervention, or can people do it on their own? And subsequent studies in this area focused on how can we understand what was really important in the self-paced people who actually quit, and what worked for them, to try to enhance the delivery of this intervention in a more cost-effective way. The bottom line is this is pretty low cost. The self-pace group is a pretty low-cost strategy, and to get a quarter of people to quit after 12 months is a pretty good number. Now we want to get it higher, but that's a pretty good intervention. So that's an example of an implementation strategy. Okay. All right, let's just talk a little bit about designs, because it's important that you know about them. So in implementation studies, you can do an RCT, a randomized controlled study, and that's what I just showed you. That was a randomized study. It was more of a, I would say it was more of a comparative effectiveness study. It didn't have a control group, although you can think of the arm that had the counselor deliver the intervention as a sort of control, because that is really the sort of standard, right? So RCTs are perfectly great to do for implementation studies, but you can also use other kinds of designs. And one of my favorite kinds of designs is to use natural experiments. So you can look at what's happening in organization or society or states or communities naturally, and piggyback onto that to design a natural experiment. Lots of implementation studies use electronic health records as their way of pulling out data. That's a very efficient way of getting the data that you need. And it's a very hands-off way in terms of getting it without having to bother patients additionally from their EHRs. Oftentimes you will see implementation studies using cluster randomized or group randomized studies. So they randomize on clinic or on site or on community rather than on individuals. And the reason for that is oftentimes because these are more generalizable interventions, oftentimes they're delivered to larger groups. So for example, if you want to test an implementation strategy that targets providers and you want to say to providers, okay, we're going to give you some academic detailing and we're going to give you a fancy EHR alert system to help you deliver X care to your patients. You don't want to randomize on patients because you're really intervening on the provider, right? So in that case, you might want to randomize as a function of the clinic so that every patient that goes to this clinic gets the same intervention by their provider. Does that make sense? Have you talked about cluster randomized trials? Yeah, okay. So those are very frequently done for implementation types of studies. And then sort of a subset of implementation science is community-based participatory research. And I know sometimes you've had a talk on that in this course. Have you had a talk on that this year? No? Okay. Community-based participatory research has as its tenet that you are engaging the community from which your participants are coming in the actual study that you're doing. So they are involved in the design of the study, they're involved in the implementation of the study, they're involved in promoting the study, they're involved even in the manuscript of the study. They are a part of the research team, but they are not researchers. They're community participants. And the idea here is that you're trying to make your study as relevant to the community in which you're delivering the intervention as possible. So community-based participatory research is often implementation science. And all of these are typically patient-centered because even if you're intervening on the provider or on the system, ultimately you want to understand the impact of that intervention on patient-level outcomes. So, just to sort of underscore this notion, in implementation research, what you're really asking is a modified strategy of an established evidence-based intervention. Is it effective in implementing that intervention into a wider population? That's what you're asking in implementation science. And when you do this, it's really important, as I said before, that you understand where the question that you're asking, the study that you're doing, where that sits on the continuum. And again, if you're developing an intervention you haven't yet tested or it hasn't been widely tested yet, you're not at the stage for doing implementation science because you really want to have a firmly tested intervention before you try to implement it. But if you are heading that way, I strongly encourage people to do what I think of as design for implementation early on in your study. Understand the kinds of implementation issues that are going to be really important. So if you're developing an intervention or doing a phase 2 trial of an intervention, it would be great if you could get some of these process measures included in addition to some of your clinic outcomes. So for example, what's the adherence like for your intervention? What's the provider adherence like for that intervention? What's the acceptance? What are the pitfalls that patients and providers and systems are telling you are present for your particular intervention? If you can get those data early on, then not only will it help you design your intervention in a more effective way, but it'll help you as you move forward and get to the point where you want to say, okay, how do I get this out into more widespread into community settings? So design for implementation throughout. Implementation science is, by its nature, a team science endeavor. It's important, if you're going to do implementation science, it's important that you have implementation science researchers on your team. It's also important that you have all the multidisciplinary expertise that you may need. And it may be important, depending on your study and depending on your community that you are focusing on, it may be important to have, as some of those experts, community experts, to help advise you on what the pitfalls might be on delivery of the particular intervention that you have. I just said these are often community-based kinds of approaches. These include worksite approaches, churches, barbershops, beauty parlors, schools, community hospitals, wherever people congregate could be a community-based site for a particular study. It's also, I think, really important that you understand that when you're doing this kind of research, you're really looking at a variety of levels. You're looking at the individual patient level, but you're also looking at higher order levels. You're looking at family integration sometimes. Sometimes you could be looking at community integration, all the way up to policy and societal kinds of things. So all of those aren't all levels that you might be intervening on, but these are all levels that you want to think about. And particularly when you move from individuals to families, because oftentimes families can have a large impact on how effectively your intervention is taken up. And of course, we've already talked about the fact that these studies are conducted with essentially non-selected participants. That is, you take all comers. And what that means is that you will have patients that have multiple comorbidities, you will have patients that have multiple abilities, and making sure that your intervention can be taken up by that broad range of patients is really critical. The thing I want to emphasize here is that you want to make sure, as you're starting out doing implementation research, you want to make sure that whatever your implementation strategy is, that it's scalable. And that's essentially, well, that's two things. It's a cost analysis. You know, can I take this implementation strategy? Let's say it's an intervention that you have made into a web-based intervention. Is that scalable? Well, it is for a lot of people, but not for everyone. Not everyone has internet availability, right? So it's scalable with some caveats. So that scalability is really critical to think about at all phases of your research. But you're not going to, in the beginning of your research, when you're doing an efficacy trial, you're not going to design your intervention around scalability. But in implementation research, you are. You want it to be scalable. Okay, a little EHR joke. Okay, here's what I want you to take home. Dissemination implementation research is contextual. We talked about that. The best programs, and by programs what I mean is interventions, the best interventions are really not rigid. They are going to evolve. They are going to be somewhat organic. And what you're really looking for is uptake, acceptance. Implementation research is really complex because it sits at many different levels. It's not just the patient, it's not just the provider, it's not just the system, the healthcare system in which the provider operates or works. It is very complex at both provider and the patient levels. And it's complex because the patients are complex. They come with lots of different conditions, lots of different abilities. And so trying to think through what those complexities are as you're designing your implementation strategy is really important. And it's not only abilities and complexities at the level of the patient, but also at the level of whoever's providing the intervention and whatever system is overseeing that provision. And a big take-home is primary outcomes for implementation science have to do with processes. Outcomes are important, but they're generally not primary. It's are these interventions taken up? Are these acceptable? Are they feasible? Is there good spread throughout a larger community? Those are the kinds of, is it cost effective? Those are the kinds of process measures that I'm talking about. Okay, some of you may be interested in pursuing more information about dissemination implementation. You're welcome to email me at any time. I'm in the Global. My last name is Stoney. But there are also other opportunities. So, for example, just about every year for the last, I can't remember how many years, but maybe 10, that's a guess, the NIH puts on a State of the D&I Science conference. It's in Bethesda, or has been so far. We have a lot of partners that we look to help us fund this. It is a very nice conference. It's usually about 1,000 participants attend. It's 2 days, and then on a third day, we oftentimes have a training session for people who are just starting their careers in implementation science. This says it's free and open to the public. It is open. It's not free anymore, but it's not very expensive. There's also something called the Training Institute for Dissemination, Implementation, Research, and Health. That's almost annually, but not quite annually. This is a competitive training institute. If you're interested, there's a web link for you to look at. This is a 5-day institute. It's very good. Really, the top people in this area come and teach at this institute. The NIH has a number of funding initiatives specifically in dissemination and implementation research. And then many of the institutes have specific centers that really focus on D&I research. At NHLBI, we have a Center for Translational Research and Implementation Science, CITRIS. Their whole focus, or most of their focus, is on implementation research, including global health research. And there's a nice website available if you want to look at that. National Cancer Institute has a very well-developed program in implementation science as well. And other institutes do as well. So there are resources out there if you're interested. And again, if you have any questions, if you want some readings, I'd be happy to provide those to you. And that's all I had, unless you have questions. Do we have any questions by email? Looks like no. Okay. Well, thank you for your attention. Have a good evening.